All right, good afternoon. I'd like to call this October 9th, 2025 special meeting of the San Diego County Water Authority Board of Directors to order at 1:32 p.m. As we move through our agenda, I will be moderating requests to speak. To request to speak, please press the speaker button at your seat. Today's meeting is being held in person with 2 directors participating remotely. General Counsel, will you please make that announcement?
Yes, Directors Hedberg and Myers are appearing under the Just Cause exception under AB 2449.
Thank you so much. Before we begin, I do want to take a moment to recognize and welcome our newest board member, Mr. Francisco Rivera. Director Rivera completed his oath of office with our clerk this morning, and he joins us as a member of the Otay, or representative, of the Otay Water District on this board. His appointment details will be on the October formal board agenda, as is the retirement of our esteemed colleague, Director Croucher. However, I wanted to make sure to recognize Director Rivera today. Welcome, Director Rivera. Would you like to share any comments at this time?
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm just looking forward to getting things done with the County Water Authority. Before I was with the Otay Water District, I was with Chula Vista for almost 40 years in their engineering department. I've done all sorts of engineering jobs, and so I'm very familiar with the industry, and I'm just a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Welcome again. That we will move to our salute to the flag. Director Ray, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you, Director Ray. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll and announce whether a quorum is present?
Director Acosta. Director Flessy.
Here.
Katz is absent. Cole.
Present.
Coates Hedberg.
Here.
Thank you.
Barely.
I can hear you. Director Scalzetti.
Here.
Vice Chair Hilliker is absent. Director Yamani.
Here.
Leahy.
Here.
Myers. Director Myers.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm present. Thank you.
Thank you. Rivera.
Here.
Roback. Quaylen. Williams is absent. Director Heidemann is absent. Norman.
Here.
Wall is absent. Director Abdullahi is absent. Ayala is absent. Bakowitz. Fong Sakai.
Present.
Director Macedo is absent. Director Madaffer. Molina is absent. Chair Serrano.
Here.
Director Vespi is absent. Director Whitburn.
Here.
Secretary Lyons.
Here.
Director Freehoff.
Here.
Director Castaneda.
Here.
Kirschbaum is absent. Director Arant. Here. Miller. Here. Ray.
Here.
Supervisor Aguirre is absent, and we have a quorum of the board.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do we have any proxies?
We have no proxies today.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on items of interest within the subject matter of the San Diego County Water Authority Board of Directors. Madam Clerk, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak?
We do. I have 2 speaker slips. The first up is Amy Reichert. Next will be Mr. Dave Everett. You have 3 minutes to make your comments, and you may begin now.
Thank you to everybody on the board for the San Diego County Water Authority. I deeply appreciate your public service. There you go. Now I don't have to stand on my tiptoes. The reason why I'm here today is as a member of the public. I've lived here in San Diego County since I was 4 years old. And we're seeing an exodus of people leaving San Diego County, and it's because of the cost of living. And of course, just recently in the news, we all read about the proposed rate increase with the city of San Diego of 62%. And I hope the San Diego City Council does do the right thing and does not reward that added increase. But what has recently come out is that it goes back right here to this board, to the San Diego County Water Authority, and the increased cost. And I understand there is inflation, right? But the problem is these capital improvement projects. Of course, we need to focus resources on our infrastructure. But I also know the harsh, stark reality of project labor agreements. And what's driving up the cost of many of these capital improvement projects, and thank you for nodding your head, are the cost of these projects. They cost more because they're not inclusive. They exclude many bidders. And of course, many of these projects only have one bidder. So I'm just coming before you just as an average citizen, just concerned about the cost of living. And it all goes back to labor and the stranglehold that they have on many people sitting in these seats. Because many people aspire to higher office, and they do what labor tells them to do. And I don't know if you follow me on social media or know what I post about, but I have been quite open that the FBI has been snooping around over some of the labor activities and some of the coercion that they have done specifically at the County Board of Supervisors. And so I'm just asking you, please, when it comes to these project labor agreements, just do the right thing by the public, not what the special interests want you to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Everett, you have 3 minutes and may begin now.
Thank you. My name is Dave Everett. I'm with the Western Electrical Contractors Association. We're a non-union, state-approved, federally approved apprenticeship program for electrical apprentices. And I'm here, I've spoken before this board several times, and I'm always pointing out the problems with this PLA, saying that you're going to get reduced bidders, you're going to get higher costs, and this isn't the first problem we've had with this PLA. The unions have not been honest with the people on this board. They said last meeting they were going to come back with all these extra bids. You guys are back here with one bid. They said that you were going to get all these great goals. We're going to set a minority participation goal. The minority participation on this project is 0. And so the unions have not been honest about this. And sadly, I feel like it's trickling down to staff on some level, because staff's telling the full committee, well, we got 3 bids. Well, and then you drill down a little bit under questioning, you only got 1 bid. And so now I think during this workshop, what we're going to see is the engineer's estimate is going to be inflated to try to cover the cost of this PLA. Don't inflate the engineer's estimate to cover for this horrible policy. At the last meeting, they said, we're going to change the engineer's estimate because the key drivers are general inflation, which is about 4 to 8%, they said. The project's core components, which focused on grading, irrigation systems, and specifically labor. It saw a significant increase in the 10 to 20% range. According to their math, they say it's approximately $1.3 million of it. But then the third component, they say the estimates were compiled by 2 different firms. There were variability issues like scope, interpretation, contingency rates, market data sources. They don't quantify any of those, because if they quantified them, you'd realize that those are all due to reduced bidders that are due to this PLA. So it's not the 10 to 20% they're talking about. It's closer to 30%, 40% that you're going to see in these increased costs. And so papering over that by using the cost estimate from some cost estimating consultant as opposed to not using the design consultant doesn't change anything. And the comments at the last meeting as well were, well, we're seeing it at the city of San Diego. We're seeing the same thing. The city of San Diego voted for one of these discriminatory and wasteful project labor agreements too. So they've reduced their bidding pool by the same 85%. You guys have reduced your bidding pool. You're seeing the same problems, so it's not shocking. And it doesn't say that, okay, this is just the market. It says that it is these PLAs, because those are the 2 things that they have in common. It's amazing that when you discriminate and you put people over politics and you discriminate against 85% of your construction market, you see higher costs. And so, the city of San Diego passed one of these wasteful and discriminatory project labor agreements, or PLAs. Todd Gloria, Jennifer Campbell, and a bunch of the council members over there take in big campaign checks from these same labor unions that are pushing the PLA, and then they're shocked that their construction costs skyrocket up. And it's not the 4%, like I just said. The city of Pomona estimated it's 30%. Gavin Newsom's
Your time is up. Thank you for your comments.
Oh, well, they said it was 30% as well.
If there are public speakers in the Zoom waiting room, please raise your hand through the Zoom app or press *9 if listening by phone. I see one speaker by the name of Eric. You have 3 minutes and may begin now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. My name is Eric Christen. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Fair Employment in Construction. We are a statewide organization that was formed 27 years ago solely to oppose discriminatory and wasteful project labor agreements. We have been fighting statewide for freedom in the construction industry for 27 years. We warned the San Diego County Water Authority what would happen when you instituted your project labor agreement, thereby demonstrating an almost like canine-like affection for the demands of big labor special interests. Fortunately, a significant minority of the board did not vote for it, so my comments today are directed at those who've demonstrated that their fiduciary responsibility is to big labor special interests, not to ratepayers and not the rest of the citizens of the region. Your first project was the Helix 9 flow control facility. You had one bidder, massively over budget, 0 women or minority business participation, 0. Progressives like to talk a good game about DEI, but when it comes to actual implementation, their words are found wanting, because in the marketplace, where their market doesn't care about your feelings, you have people that are being discriminated against and simply don't bid your projects. Those that are left bidding your projects are from out of the area, because San Diego construction workforce is 90% non-union. So you're getting people from outside the area. Of course, you're going to have lower minority and women business enterprise participation, but you're also going to have lower local hire participation. Your next project, the Pipeline 5 relining in San Luis Rey Canyon, had 0, again, % minority contractor and women participation. And it just continues on now with the current project that you almost rebid without a PLA. Unfortunately, the San Diego contingent, which just has, again, this canine affection for the demands of union bosses, narrowly got it to rebid with a PLA, and you have one bidder again. 0 minority participation, 0 women business enterprise participation, and your local hire numbers will, of course, be terrible again. That's what a PLA gets you. You have a chance when this thing comes up for expiration to do the right thing and put the interest of all citizens, all workers, not just those who carry a union card, which and in the country. You have a chance to do the right thing, put these projects back out to bid for everybody to bid on, union and non-union alike, and we hope that you do so. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I see no further requests, Chair Serrano.
Thank you very much. Item 5 is our discussion and presentation items. Item 5.1 is the Capital Improvement Program Workshop. Today's Capital Improvement Program Workshop was planned in response to requests by board members during the budget process this past spring. As you all know, the CIP is a critical component of what this agency does to ensure water supply reliability both today and over the long term. It's also a key element of affordability, and our job as board members is to strike the right balance between risk and cost. I know firsthand how seriously this board takes that responsibility. Since joining the board, we have refocused the agency's CIP to where it is today, a CIP with no new local supply projects, a focus on mission-critical projects, and reducing our CIP budget by deferring projects without compromising service or reliability. In the last budget cycle alone, these actions reduced the CIP by $80 million, resulting in ratepayer savings. That's why today's informational presentations and discussions are so valuable. Staff today will provide both an overview of the CIP and significant detail about how they work within the parameters set by this board to maintain a reliable water delivery system both today and for the long term. It's worth noting that this agency has a long track record of excellence with regard to assessing and sustaining our system, and I want to thank both the staff that you will hear from and their colleagues for that work that they do day in and day out. As a reminder, this workshop is for informational purposes. Staff will consider any input received today. I will turn the floor over to Nina Kuzmich, Director of Engineering, to get us started. Nina?
Great. Thank you, Chair Serrano, and good afternoon, board members. Joining me today, this is a group effort in presenting various components of this workshop are Jeff Shove, Principal Engineer, Jeremy Crutchfield, Water Resources Manager, Martin Coghill, Operations and Maintenance Manager, as well as Jason Gornell, Engineering Manager. Throughout this workshop, we will have several opportunities to engage in discussions after each segment of the presentations. So the agenda for today, I will provide a brief overview of the Water Authority and describe the differences between a regional and local system. The next two agenda items will describe the foundational elements that drive the CIP. Jeff Shove will describe these guiding principles. Jeremy Crutchfield will describe the incorporation of member agency agreements and requests and the facilities planning process that identifies specific CIP projects. Martin Coghill will explain how he and his team gather and use data to identify specific assets that need to be repaired, rehabilitated, or replaced. And then Jason Gornell will cover the CIP budget task force item. This is the real focus for today's workshop. Jason will describe how the CIP budget is developed, and then based on feedback that we received from the board over the last few months, Jason will get more granular with respect to cost estimating and how it ties into our project development and budgeting process. And then I'll wrap up the workshop. So our mission is to ensure a safe and reliable supply of water to the entire San Diego region, and we do that through a network of over 300 miles of large diameter pipelines or transmission pipelines that deliver water to all of you, our member agencies, who have the local systems which serve the end users. I like to think of our pipelines more like the freeway system that connects all of the cities within San Diego County. Through our pipelines, we convey both treated and untreated water. On the first aqueduct, which is located just east of Interstate 15, we have pipelines 1 and 2. Those convey treated water in the northern section of the county and then transition to untreated just south of Hubbard Hill. Those pipelines are constructed of reinforced concrete. On the second aqueduct, which is located just west of Interstate 15, we have Pipeline 3, which conveys untreated water and is a steel pipe. Pipeline 4, which is a treated water pipeline, which is pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe. And Pipeline 5, which is untreated and is also pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe. In addition to our pipelines, we have several facilities and structures. So we have about 1,600 structures that allow us to drain and refill our pipelines as needed. We have 100 flow control facility connections conveying water to our member agencies. And then we have several pump stations, a treatment plant, and a dam and reservoir. Before we get into the details of the workshop, I want to take a moment to just walk through the fundamental differences between a regional system the Water Authority has and a local system on the retail side delivering water to the end user. Due to its large scale and high pressures of the Water Authority's system is susceptible to higher risks if it fails. The more risk we put on our system, the higher likelihood of failure. That is why we are very cautious when asked to move to a higher risk CIP. Both the regional and local systems are equally important. Disruptions to either of these systems has a different level of impact. For the Water Authority's regional system, a failure potentially disrupts the entire region, affecting millions of customers. On the local side, a failure will also have impact, but be limited to potentially a specific area, impacting thousands of customers. As an upstream provider, the regional system can have a cascading effect if it fails. Each of these systems has different levels of vulnerabilities, and the impact can vary greatly. Regional threats of drought, seismic, and cyber attacks can result in a widespread impact, and because the system lacks redundancy, take a very long time to repair. There are also local threats that you may face, such as pipe breaks or contamination, and typically on a local system, there's opportunities for redundancy, and repairs can be completed in a faster time frame. Finally, there can be bigger consequences of failure in the Water Authority's large diameter, high volume, and high pressure system as compared to a localized failure at reduced volumes and pressure. So I would like you to keep these differences in mind as we go through the workshop today. Because the Water Authority's aqueduct system has a much greater impact if it fails, causing a direct impact to all of you, we need to keep the integrity of the system at the forefront of our daily activities so that we can deliver and maintain a safe and reliable water supply. So that's the sole purpose of the Capital Improvement Program, to ensure we have a system that will deliver water 24 hours a day, every day of the year. This is the CIP forecast for the next 5 years, which is based on a moderate risk CIP that you approved in June. As we go through this workshop today, we will be presenting information on how we develop the CIP and the steps we take to identify specific projects that are included in the 2-year budgets. Now I'll turn it over to Jeff Schoaf to discuss the guiding principles used to develop the CIP.
Thank you, Nina. So let's take a moment to review the principles that guide the development of the CIP every 2 years. It all starts with our mission statement. That's the foundation that drives us every 2 years, and that is to maintain and provide a safe and reliable water supply to the member agencies as well as to the region. This has been and it will continue to be the driving force as we develop the CIP. When the board adopted its strategic plan, it enhanced these principles to include doing so in both a cost-effective and environmentally sensitive manner. So when you think of these 4 principles of being safe, reliable, cost-effective, environmentally sensitive, these are the principles that guide the CIP. Some of these we do not have any discretion over. Why? Because they're governed by laws and regulations. So there's our things that are requiring us to do certain things at a certain time. However, in other areas, we do have some discretion, and that's where we rely on a risk-based approach to developing both the scope, the schedule, as well as the budget. And so we let the data drive the development of the CIP. And so as we go through this workshop this afternoon, you're going to hear that principle or that thought carried throughout, that the CIP is a risk-based system. We let the data drive what we do and when we do it. So I'm going to go through each of these principles briefly to illustrate that. Let's start with our non-discretionary items. These are items that we must do because of regulatory requirements. Now, all of our projects have to comply with environmental regulations. So in California, we're governed by the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. If there's any use of federal funds, such as a grant, then we have to also comply with the federal level, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. All of our projects have to comply with those, and most of our projects have some sort of revegetation requirement. Lasts around 5 years. We also have projects that are needed to comply with our Natural Community Conservation Plan, or our NCCP, as well as our Habitat Conservation Plan, or our HCP. And a good example of that is the San Luis Rey Wetland Habitat Restoration Project that you approved last month to move forward with construction. On the right there, you see an example of what we did over at Doolin Hill. This was our plant establishment project there to help comply with those as well. So again, there are must-do projects that we have to do, and we don't have much leeway as to what it is and when it has to be done. Looking at safety, again, there are certain projects that are non-discretionary. They're controlled by laws and regulations. Now, some of these can be funded through the operating budget, such as the monitoring and sampling of our water for water quality. But there are some projects that deal directly with safety that are funded through the CIP. So, for example, on the right there, you see a picture of our Red Mountain Treated Water Tunnel. We repaired several of the tunnels on the treated water system. And I don't know if you can see it, but if you look really close, you can see some water that's kind of squirting into that treated water tunnel. So this is untreated groundwater seeping into our treated water system. You don't want that to happen. Now, I want to point out this did not pose an immediate threat to health and safety, but the Division of Drinking Water said, look, you got to take care of this, and you need to take care of it right away. So that's a good example of a non-discretionary item. We had to take care of it. It's not something that we could defer. And on the horizon, we have some future projects that are also dealing with water quality, specifically our nitrification study. We have lower demands on the system. It's causing some little issues for our operators relative to nitrification, and there's potential for chlorine injection facilities as we go down the line. Continuing on this non-discretionary thought is safety. Again, there are some items that we just don't have discretion on. Now, some of this can be funded again through the operating budget, like our SCADA cybersecurity. but also some can be incorporated into CIP. And so where we can, where it's feasible, we incorporate some of these safety features into our CIP. So the Helix 9 flow control facility project that you see pictured there, we had some fencing to help unauthorized intrusion into our property, as well as the installation of some very high-quality cameras that help our operators up in Escondido monitor the safety of that facility. So that's examples of our non-discretionary items. So let's move to parts of that, of the CIP, where we do have a little bit of latitude. As Nina mentioned, our system is a high-pressure system. I don't know if you saw on the chart, but certain portions of our system can reach pressures exceeding 500 psi. Now, to put that in comparison or relative, at your house, you have pressures in 70, 80 psi perhaps. You may have out at the street a higher pressure, but maybe you have a pressure reducing valve at your house to lower the pressures. Our pressures can reach 5 times what you see at your house, and those pressures pose a real threat to life and property. So pictured on the right is an example of what can happen when a disaster occurs. You've seen this picture before. This happened in 2006. This was a failure of one of our pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipes. And that type of failure is the type of thing that keep us up at night. We want to make sure that this does not happen. But we do have ways that help us mitigate these dangers. Martin Coghill will get into this a little later in the workshop, but we monitor our PCC pipe with our acoustic fiber optic monitoring system. We also do regular condition assessments of our system. We will get into the pipelines, we'll visually inspect them, and also we have some very high-tech tools that we use that will help us scan really the health of the pipe. And when we do that, we can give attention then to specific critical areas of the aqueduct system, and we have a couple of ways that we can handle those. So on the left there, you see a picture of our relining. You hear a lot of the asset management is relining our pipelines. But sometimes we don't have to reline the whole pipeline. If there's maybe just a portion of it, maybe it's a stick or two, we can do something else like what we did recently on Pipeline 4, that's pictured there on the right, and we can do a spot repair. So we have some latitude using a risk-based approach in determining what is the best method that will help stretch our CIP dollars. When we think of reliability, we also have some latitude on what we do there. Now, our goal is to be 100% reliable. That means no unplanned outages to our pipelines or to our facilities, no failures of our pipeline, of our facilities. Sometimes we don't accomplish that goal. And what you see there on the left is a failure of a flow control facility that happened up in the Escondido area. That's not what we want to happen. And so sometimes we don't reach that goal of 100% reliability, but we try hard to do that. And the way we do that is we regularly inspect our facilities. And again, we use risk-based implementation to try to prevent that from happening. Some of the things that we look at is age of the facility. We'll look at components to see how they're doing. It might be mechanical, electrical, structural, whether the facility meets current codes, whether it be a building code or a safety code, how often we go in and have to repair the facility and the like. And the solution to a particular problem may be a total replacement. So what you see there on the right is the Helix 1 flow control facility, built in 1947, served us well. And what you see at the bottom is the recent Helix 9 flow control facility. We just mentioned that a little earlier. It's not done yet, but it's almost done. But I don't think anyone would argue that the old facility in 1947 served us well, but it saw its better days, needed to be replaced. But replacement isn't always the answer. By looking at those specific things I talked about, we might be able to do something that I like to call this a surgical approach. Just focus on whatever the issue is at the time might be just replacing some of the mechanical, maybe the valving, maybe it's just replacing some of the electrical. And so we look at that. Each time a problem comes up, replacement certainly isn't the option, or it certainly could be an option, but it's not always the option. And by doing that, we can stretch our CIP dollars. I'd like to walk you through an example of how we come to the most cost-effective solution. Now, this is going to be a very simple example, but it's a real-life example, and I think it does help illustrate the process we go through to develop the CIP. What you're looking at there on the right are the vents. There's 3 vents, pipeline 3, 4, and 5, on the second aqueduct. Now, this is Miramar Hill, and if you drive the 15, right around Mercy Road, Scripps Poway Parkway, right around where our Rancho Penasquitos hydro facility is, if you look up on the hill to the west, you'll see these 3 vents. So there's a crack, looks bad. And so our O&M folks saw this. They brought it to our attention for potential inclusion in the CIP. So I'm going to walk you through the analysis that we go through to determine what is the best cost-effective solution for an issue like this. If this vent were to fail, just look at the one with the crack. It could cause damage to the surrounding area, but it also could render the second aqueduct as inoperable. So the low-risk option, which arguably is the most expensive option, could be just to replace the whole thing. But that's not the only option. You could go to a moderate risk, and since the interior of that vent's in good shape, maybe you just address the exterior, chip away that outer coating, and just reapply that. That's an option. Or you could go to an increased risk, which is do nothing. Or maybe you go through and you patch that crack. Now, patching that crack probably is something you're going to have to do a lot. So I ask you, rhetorically, what is the most cost-effective solution here? Well, we chose to go with the do-nothing option. And the reason why is because the vent is not in imminent failure. It's not ready to collapse. We monitor our aqueduct monthly, so we can keep an eye on this. So if something were to happen, we could pivot and address it, but right now it doesn't seem to be something that we have to take care of right now. In fact, you'll be considering the long-range financing plan, a draft copy of that later on this month. We have deferred this project outside of the 10-year plan. So this is a very simple example, but it's what we do on every project to figure out what is the most cost-effective solution to an issue at hand, and it's not always the most expensive. So to sum up this portion of the workshop, the guiding principles when we look at the CIP is to be environmentally sensitive, we want to be safe, we want to be reliable, and we want to be cost-effective. Sometimes we have no discretion on what we can do. Laws, the regulations will govern what we do and when we do it, but at other times we can take a risk-based approach. We can let the data drive what we do and when we do it. So that's a lot, and we got a lot more to cover, but I think this might be a good time just to pause and see if there's any comments or input to what we've presented so far.
I would tend to agree, and there are several comments. Wow. Director Aran.
So the failure of this vent, if it were to fail, it could take out the other 2 vents, which would force a shutdown of the aqueduct. So if that vent fails, is it going to be an incremental failure or is it going to be a catastrophic failure? In other words, it's going to fail incrementally and you can see it happening, or it goes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we looked at that. It would more than likely be an incremental failure. We took a look at the steel. The steel is thick. It's not. It doesn't look like it's just going to collapse all at once. So we can monitor it on a regular basis, and we would probably see that coating to start to come off further. It would not just be a sudden collapse.
That's a welded steel can inside?
Yes.
The new director at RANC, Director Leahy.
Not yet.
No comments on that. So I did the question on slide 18 where we talk about reliability. So the goal of 100% reliability. And my question is that something that the board directed for staff as a 100% reliability goal? And before we answer that, I'll go full circle to what my intention is this board, on an annual basis, we review the budget and we set the rates and we constantly put strain on the staff to do better and make cuts or look at decreasing the amount of capital. And if this is a board-adopted goal of 100%, the board needs to understand that not only we're expecting our staff to hit 100% reliability, but then we're cutting them at the knees and saying, but we're not going to give you the funds to support that. So if this is a board-adopted goal, I think that the board needs to understand that and make sure that we're providing the funding to support. Or if not, then the board needs to adopt what goal it wants and be able to provide the funding that aligns with that. And I know that those conversations happen at other districts. We're all concerned about the rates that the Water Authority is setting and the impacts to the member agencies. But again, if we are here setting that standard, we need to be all aligned, our goals and then the appropriate funding. So is that something that we know?
The short answer is it's more of a staff-driven goal rather than the board taking a formal position on the CIP.
I think that would be helpful for the board to see and make a decision on, because again, I think it's unfair for staff to try to hit a goal that they have side of the city of San Diego or another agency is okay with having some impacts, maybe 95% is okay and good enough, then we need to be able to provide enough funding for that. If we demand that the Water Authority provides water at all times and is 100% reliable, then we have as a board are responsible to provide that funding. So I think that's something that's important to come back to make sure that we're not putting staff in an inappropriate spot and making them make hard decisions. Thank you.
Understood, Director Leahy. I also would remind everybody that we're in the midst of the long-range financing plan, so I think that's also part and parcel of this conversation as well. As this board is going to be asked as part of that process and the adoption in November to look at a lot of priorities in terms of how we budget and finance around here. So, I mean, add that in as well. Director Roback.
About the pressures and how much higher they were than a residential system. How high are they? I guess I didn't catch that.
Yeah, so portions of our system are in excess of 500 PSI. So about 5 times what you would see at your house.
When you say portions, that's a small portion? Or I mean, what's the average in terms of the...
Significant portions of our system are up there. I wouldn't say they're upwards excess of 500 PSI, but they're well above what you'd see in a residential area.
Just out of curiosity, why is that? Why is it so much higher?
Well, you're dealing with, first of all, we don't have redundancy in our system, but you're dealing with very large volumes, very large pipes. Our pipes, Pipeline 5, for example, is 108 inches, and we're carrying a hydraulic gradient from Riverside, from Lake Skinner coming down. It's just a very high pressure system.
It's just the nature of this. Okay.
Yes. So just an example, when you see somebody hit a fire hydrant, pretty impressive, but that's 120 PSI. So you can imagine if it's 400 PSI.
Director Rivera.
Yes, my concern is on the CIP programs about scope creep. And so explain how the scope of work is defined in each CIP.
In each project?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do a preliminary planning report on every one of our projects to define exactly what the scope is. And we try to nail that down as best we can with the information that we have. As we progress through the design, things may change. For example, utilities may be not in the place that we thought they were going to be, and it's going to take us some extra time, some extra money to fix that. But relative to At the very beginning, we try to gather all the information at our disposal at the time and develop and try to nail down best we can what that scope is. And that's why it'll come back a little bit later when we go through our cost estimating. Our initial, what we call a Class 5 estimate, has a very large contingency to handle any type of unknowns that may come up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Director Molina.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to follow what Director like he said. And so in regards to a lot of the conversations that we're having with the CIP and a lot of these agreements, it seems like we're always off when it comes to our estimates and what we put out there. Is there a way that we can be more supportive, or is there something that we can do to anticipate a lot of these excess costs so that next time we actually put things out to bid, we get a little bit closer, or at least are in a similar ballpark to what your expectations are?
Can you be more specific? Because I think what we've done when we've gotten our latest bid results, it's really driven by competition is what we're seeing. We have fewer competition. We've acknowledged that some of our estimates have been lower. They're also a budgeting tool for us. And we're going to get into that a little bit later in the discussion.
Yeah.
But if you have a specific question, it seemed more general.
I could wait for that piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Freehoff, then Director Norman.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it, especially walking through those guiding principles and that one example with a Miramar vent, because that wasn't the one I guessed. So, I was pleased. Thank you. I guess I want to talk a little bit more about reliability. And I know Director Leahy mentioned that. And I think it's important to distinguish the difference between reliability in the sense of facilities versus reliability in the sense of supply. Because I do not want to have, for our ratepayers, to have a shortage because we did not maintain our system. So I think if you look at it in that context, I do want to be 100% reliable, resilient in our infrastructure. I want to make sure that we can deliver the water. Now, in regards to supply, that's something maybe the board can talk about. Do we want to have, as far as an affordability issue, what does it take to get 100% supply reliability? And what does that cost? So it was just a point of clarification, maybe, when we're talking about reliability, distinguish the difference. So thank you.
Director Norman.
Thank you, Chair. My question goes along with the whole idea of the reliability. You talk about the 100%, and yet just taking that vent example, having it 100% in good working order affords us a certain amount of expectation that we will get the supply or whatever the heck a vent does. Heck if I know. But in any case, when I think of 100% reliability, that's based on what is the risk. It's not on its own. So if it's going to shut down a whole slew of folks versus a smaller, so how does that, the effect of the risk or on the percentage of a system not being as reliable as 100%? Do you know what I mean?
Thank you. May I suggest staff go back to the slide where we do talk about 100%?
Yeah.
What you'll see is the sub-bullets really speak to this point. So 100% reliability can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, and we can interpret it differently. What staff is saying here is that we are anticipating no unplanned outages,
right,
and no failures of pipelines. Is that going to stop us from being able to deliver water to our member agencies? No. That's why staff was comfortable choosing the no action at that point. Nina, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. So in terms of 100% reliability, this came up when we were doing the FY24-25 budget, and we were coming back for a 10% increase. The board had approved a 10% decrease in our CIP appropriation during that 2-year. I'm not sure if you were here or not. And one of those projects that we were looking to continue with was the Alevenhain flow control facility, to upgrade that. Alevenhain specifically said, we don't need that. We're fine in terms of our reliability within our system. That's an example of making accommodations for system reliability. It's working with our member agencies. If they have a workaround with another facility, so we listened to the member agency, and then we deferred that project. Our responsibility is to make sure, just as Deputy General Manager Berg said, is we need to be able to deliver water to all of you. Really, our focus, as you have indicated during the course of development of our budgets, is to focus on our pipelines. That is what the majority of our CIP is focused on, is rehabilitating our pipeline systems so that we can deliver water. It does involve structure rehabilitation because those are tied to our pipelines. But a lot of our flow control facilities that directly feed and connect to all of our member agencies, those we have pushed off. And I believe those have pushed off for the next 5 years, even longer, in our system because we're focused on our pipelines. Jeff mentioned that we'll look at individual assets. So we've had to we've had to replace valves. We've had to do some replacements within those facilities, but we're not completely rehabilitating those if they don't need to be. So that's where we're kind of managing the system, but ensuring that unless a member agency says they don't need 100% reliability from us, and I forget who asked the question about if it was board director, I think it was Director Leahy, we run under the guise of providing 100% reliability. If there's a different approach, we'll evaluate that. But that's our goal, is 100% reliability.
I think so. I think I get it.
All right, seeing no further speakers, I'll turn it back to staff for the remainder of the presentation.
All right, thank you. So now I'll turn it over to Jeremy Crutchfield, and he'll introduce our next topic, how CIP projects are developed.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So we just talked about our guiding principles for CIP, and now we're going to transition in how projects actually end up in our CIP. And there are multiple ways that can happen. I'm going to cover a few of the ways that were more common in the past when we were building out our regional system, but do still play a role in development of our current CIP. And then Martin will come up and he'll talk about our asset management program, which really is the driver of our current CIP. Okay, so for the first set of ways that I'm going to talk about have to do with existing ESP or agreement obligations that we have for infrastructure improvements or specific facility requests that we get from our member agencies. So the picture on the left is the ESP dam, and this is a good example of existing agreements that we have in place that have obligations that lead to CIP development. The San Vicente Dam raise was part of a 1998 ESP agreement between the Water Authority and the City of San Diego. Through that agreement, we raised the San Vicente Dam, if you recall, by to increase and provide ESP, emergency, and carryover storage for the region. Out of that agreement, there were also obligations for ongoing facilities and cost splits between the two agencies that we work with the City of San Diego on an annual basis to identify what those needs are and those costs. And those costs are then incorporated into each 2-year budget build that we bring to this board for the CIP. Transitioning to the member agency requests that we can get for new facilities on the regional system. The picture on the right is the Padre Dam 7 flow control facility. And that's a somewhat recent example of a request that came from Padre Dam for this. And when those requests come in, we work with member agencies to plan and develop those projects. Now, while those projects are typically reimbursed and funded by the member agencies, those costs are incorporated and do increase our CIP multi-year budget and 2-year appropriation. The next segment of projects really come from our foundational planning documents, and that includes the Urban Water Management Plan and the Water Facilities Master Plan. Now, these documents really look at a 40,000 level view of what our infrastructure needs to meet supply and system operations over a 20 to 25 year planning horizon. These two documents, what we've been seeing over the last few years is a transition, especially when we're talking about the Water Facilities Master Plan. That's a transition away from new capacity or increased capacity projects, a transition away from new supply projects, and a focus on system resiliency and optimization. The 2024 Master Plan is a great example of that. That was a document that was approved by this board earlier this year. And if you recall, it only had 6 projects that were recommendations that rolled out of that document and out of that evaluation that ended up in the CIP. And that's because, again, we're really looking and focusing on projects that leverage and use our assets that we've already developed over the last several decades. So those projects from the 2024 Master Plan really supported our asset management program and how that's going to be implemented over the years, specifically looking at system modifications that we needed to make to support the future relining of Pipeline 4 and the crossover pipeline. The last component I'll add here is that building from these master planning documents, we can do specific facility planning studies on larger projects. And the purpose of that is to get a more granular look at these facilities, looking at different alternatives, costs, and better ways to implement those projects before we bring those to the board and include them into our CIP. So with that, I'd like to bring Martin up. Again, he's going to be focusing where our CIP drivers are now, and that is the asset management program.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon, Chair Serrano, members of the board. The next few slides will cover the asset management program, and we'll cover the reasons for starting asset management activities here at the Water Authority. We'll also cover the progressive steps in maturity that we've made over the past 3 decades or so in the form of our capabilities. And we'll also talk about how we utilize data to drive risk-based decisions, which result ultimately in recommendations for projects that represent the majority of today's CIP. On this one slide, we'll briefly talk about the history of the program. Asset management activities began in the 1980s following a catastrophic failure of a section of pipe in 1979. And in that upper picture, you see a failed section of pre-stressed pipe that flooded several homes in the south of the county. And in the early 1980s, the first corrosion studies began, where soil conditions were seen to correlate with the degradation of pre-stressed pipe. And this is a phenomenon that exists throughout our county. In the mid-1990s, the Aqueduct Protection Program was commissioned by the board, and this has evolved into what we now know as the Asset Management Program, which came into existence in 2009 to consolidate several asset management activities that were being undertaken at that time. As Jeff mentioned, in 2006, we had that failure in Mission Trails Regional Park, and we were very fortunate it was in a park. This could equally have happened in an urban setting with obviously much higher impacts. The asset management team has gradually introduced the use of technologies to help assess aging assets, and we continue to look for those innovative ways to assess our assets to realize the most from their lifespans. And ideally, we want to be able to confidently extend the lifespans of pipelines and other facilities through a proactive repair approach, and it's these technologies that allow us to do that. In the upper left image, in 2006, we started using remote field transformer coupling technology, and that's to assess the condition of pre-stressed pipe. It's still a current technology, and it's used throughout the world today for owners of pre-stressed pipe. In the upper middle image, also in 2006, we started the installation of the acoustic fiber optic monitoring, and this is our continuous monitoring system for our pre-stressed pipe. In the upper right image, we took a sidestep for about 5 years to assess 40 miles of steel pipe using magnetic flux leakage. In the lower left image, since 2016, we've adopted the use of remote field electromagnetics to assess some bar rat and reinforced concrete pipe. And I've got a question for you. Does anybody know which member agency in this region first used that technology? Looking around. Nobody knows. It was Otay Water District. They were the first to use remote field technology. We followed them, and then there's been a few member agencies use that technology to this day. In the lower middle picture, in 2022, we purchased our own underwater ROV. This inspects quagga mussel infestations at the Leeuwenhoek Reservoir. And it was this tool that discovered the depleted anodes on the gates to the inlet-outlet tower. And in April of this year, we shared with you the specialized diving services that we employed to replace those anodes. And then also finally in 2022, in that lower right, the board approved procuring risk curves for all remaining in-service, non-rehabilitated pre-stress pipe, which plays a vital part in our risk assessment approach. So the program utilizes the industry standard approach of considering total risk, and that is made up with probability of failure and consequence of failure. And we're going to look at some of the parameters at play here. So under the probability of failure, we begin with pre-stressed wire breaks, which we've covered, pipeline corrosion, facility degradation, valve cavitation. That's a feature of some of our flow control facilities because of the pressure differential across control valves. Seismic risk, age, and other factors that play into the probability of failure. And there's a question mark at the bottom, and that's deliberate because we learn new things all the time. As this program has matured, we're learning new things about how our assets fail within the conditions that they're doing their job. And then on the other side, the consequence of failure, we have the kind of obvious stuff, the surrounding community, nearby property, adjacent utilities, redundancy. That's a factor of, could we afford to lose a facility or a section of pipe? Is there enough redundancy in the system to maintain the level of service to member agencies, as you've just been discussing? And of course, level of service is our top priority in terms of consequence of failure. Damage recovery and other items play a part in the consequence of failure. And again, the question mark is deliberate because we do learn new things as we move along. So both halves of this total risk equation, we're going to refer to these as the P's and the C's as we move on. And over the years, we've used different ways to interrogate the data that we've gathered, from simple risk matrices to informative visual graphics. And we'll start with the risk matrix. So this is a simple representation of assets with probability of failure along one axis and the consequence of failure along the other, the P's and the C's. And in this example, the individual icons that are on that chart represent reaches of pipe, and this data is from about 12 years ago. It's quite old. The simple graphic shows, higher ranked projects in the upper right portion of that image, and then the lower ranked projects towards the lower left. But we've learned that more illustrative ways of displaying the data can be more effective. And the image on the right shows our geospatial representation of the P's and the C's. So take a look at that upper left P. That's right next to some red dots, and they are projected recorded by the acoustic monitoring system. The P on the right is above a stack of coloured features that represent the total number of wire breaks, again, within those pipe sections. And then the C's are kind of self-explanatory. We have a utility corridor there that we share. Our pipeline has a high-pressure gas main, overhead power lines, and there's obviously residential areas. There's a high school and other features that would be impacted from the pipe failure. This section of pipe is down in the East Lake area, just north of Lower Otay. It has been rehabilitated. We secured that in 2013. But while those previous examples have played their part in our program, I'm very proud to the extent that we've now come as a team. And this is especially so for the way we now manage our pre-stressed pipe. And our analysis uses practically every available tool available in the industry. Now, this graphic that you see in front of you is just of one of 20 similar packages of data that represent the 25 miles of pre-stressed pipe that we still have in service that's not been rehabilitated. The upper portion of the graphic is an aerial image, represents about 1.5 miles of Pipeline 4 in North County, and is a section of Pipeline 4 we have delineated as a future relining project. North is on the left, south on the right. Now, as we move down through the data, the green P shows the data corresponding to the total number of wire breaks in any given pipe stick, represented on a 1 to 5 scale. The yellow P represents the rate of change of wire breaks, something that is of high value to us and something that you can only actually get from an acoustic monitoring system. The consequence of failure is digitized into that blue line and represented by the letter C there. And finally, a weighted total of all the data is at the bottom, summarized in red. And all of these attributes play their part in determining our rehabilitation recommendations for pre-stressed pipe. And so this graphic covers the criticality of that section of pipe. So what are we really looking at? What's the high-level view of this graphic? Well, simply put, the spiky bits are what keep me up at night. And they might look like innocent data points, but they really represent how close those sections of pipe sticks are to failure. Now, this section is ranked 6th in the criticality of remaining reaches. It's about 10 to 12 years away from being rehabilitated. Will it last that long, or will we have a failure before that time? I'm not sure I'm going to last that long with looking after this stuff, but I can say, like, what we're doing is the best that we can with the resources we have, with the finances that we have. We really are looking after this type of pipe. So to summarize our asset management efforts, we perform condition assessments following a structured plan. We have a condition assessment plan. It's a multi-year plan. It actually goes out to 2060, if anybody's really interested in reading that. We perform routine visual inspections. We also apply, as we've discussed, the use of technologies as appropriate. We collect actionable data and use visualization tools to help us perform a risk analysis. And ultimately, we make recommendations for projects to repair, rehabilitate, or replace assets administered through the CIP. Before I conclude, I do want to emphasize that while the data we gather indicates the need for investments that support repair or rehabilitation, it equally can be used to prove that assets are surviving beyond their anticipated lifespans. Now, an example of this is certainly the case for Pipeline 2, which is part of the first aqueduct. It's our second oldest pipe, constructed in 1952 of reinforced concrete cylinder pipe, and is indicating nothing but robustness that goes beyond its book lifespan of 75 years. That 75 years will come around in 2 years' time. So by employing these asset management practices, we can, with confidence, extend the lifespan of assets should the data support that. And that is saving literally tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in premature investment. And this is literally the essence of why we have an asset management program, and why I am particularly excited, grateful, and proud to be part of it. And that concludes the asset management program section. Thank you. Be happy to have any questions.
Thank you, Martin. Director Medeffer.
Just was reminded again when I saw this. Many of you, some of you as board members for a while have seen it, but back, I don't know what year it was, 2004? When did the mission
2006.
Trail? 2006. It's always a slide worth putting up, just because, you know, as you mentioned, when a fire hydrant blows, big deal. You get, you know, it is a big deal sometimes if somebody's home gets flooded. But if you get a 108-inch pipeline break, you can kill people. And that's why as long as I've been on this board, and there's the photo there, showing what happened inside Mission Trails Regional Park, right above the San Diego River. Had that pipeline broke anywhere in Scripps Ranch, Penasquitos, Escondido, you name it, the results would have been much different. And I got to tell you, it was the work of the Water Authority which patented and pioneered the equipment that I think, what do you do once a year, Nina? You guys still do that out in the lobby with the demonstration? Well, not every year. Well, you should. We got a lot of new board members. But it's impressive the technology that the Water Authority patented and came up with that nobody else has, to be able to listen to those bands inside the pipe that might be breaking or broken, it's pretty fascinating. And I think a lot of that credit is why you see this aggressive relining and pipe replacement program, so we don't have something like that. I mean, you just look at how small those people are compared to that chasm that broke. That was a big break, and we were real lucky that it happened above the San Diego River instead of in a neighborhood. So again, never skimp when it comes to the Water Authority and keeping our system.
Director Freehoff, followed by Director Arant.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. It was very informative. Could you go back to slide 30? I think that one really made an impact on me. I think I just have a couple questions. You mentioned the orange line, or the yellowish orange, is a range of change?
A rate of change.
Rate of change. Can you define that for me?
Yeah, so it's basically how quickly the wire breaks are coming. And that example in when it failed, and it recorded, I don't know if you remember, during the budget build, we had the workshop where we showed a rapid number of wire breaks on a plot. There were like 19 wire breaks within a few hours. It's that quick rate of change is what we get worried about.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Yeah, you see one break and when another one doesn't come for another 5 years, and you don't worry about it.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
and then you mentioned that this section is ranked 6th out of...
There's about 20 projects in the future for us to realize complete relining of all of the remaining pre-stressed pipe.
So how is this 6th out of, I'm sorry, is it like you've got 20 projects and this is number 6 in the
list? Yeah, in terms of ranking, yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then have you, and I apologize if I missed this, have you done this analysis for all the pipelines?
For this particular types, we've done some condition assessments. It's not like for like because their failure mechanisms are different, and so we have different ways of projecting that information.
Okay, so you have done this for all the pre-stressed
pipe, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just add? I'd like to just add one other thing too. This is a workshop, so I'm kind of keeping it a little bit light. So one of the things that we did is based on Martin's data, our priorities and sections of pipe, the pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe that are on our list. So engineering gets them and we start the design. You're going to see this in Jason's next section. It takes about 2 to 3 years from start of design to construction. We may change the segment that we start designing. And that was the case this year, actually. He got new data, the frequency of change increased on a section. And so he asked us, hey, pivot. We need to push this section out because we were is the next section that we're going out to bid with, became more important. And so we then pivoted and we started to do that design. And he also referenced just the rate of change of the wire breaks. So in 2006, I don't believe our AFO cable was installed. We hadn't flipped the switch to turn it on, right? It was just barely on and we were barely monitoring, and that's what happened is the break happened. But then we just did a repair, the Lilac Road repair, where we were monitoring and we saw that it was starting to go. We made that decision very timely, and it was just upstream of some houses. Had that pipe broke and we didn't replace it when we did, we saw that the wire breaks increased significantly as we started to do that work. So we're almost in a just-in-time manner, and that is reflective of this moderate risk. CIP, I saw your reaction that this pipe section was 10 to 12 years down the road. That's what we're managing. So we are managing the data. We're grateful for Martin's group because we get updated data. He's monitoring it, and he'll let us know when we need to shift. I do have a slide kind of towards the end to show what our relining construction outlook looks like. And so you'll see all the sections, and that's just on the pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe. That's what we're addressing with the relining program. And you'll see that towards the conclusion of the workshop.
Yeah, just one more thing real quick. And I really appreciated your comment in regards to going through this effort to really look at the condition of the pipe and that maybe we don't need to make improvements. And so I think that's where we get to the cost-effective issue here in implementing the CIP. So I appreciate hearing that too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Arant.
Yeah, back to the issue of reliability. I did some quick math. If you say we're going to be 90% reliable, that means you're going to be off roughly 36 days a year. I don't think that's acceptable. So I like the 100% reliability goal, and that's unplanned. We, in my end of the county, we go through some unplanned shutdowns, which are manageable, but unplanned shutdowns are not. I've also, along with Jim, watched the evolution of these technologies and our ability to monitor our pipes. Not too long ago, we shipped Martin up to Calgary, Canada, with some 2 sticks of pipe, I think, to fix a big problem. I'm not sure what their monitoring program was, but as we monitor these pipelines, we're essentially creating a legal responsibility to respond to that data. I'd hate to have a situation where something blows up and people find out, oh, well, but you knew this thing was in trouble and you didn't fix it. So it's not a lot of discretion here in what we're doing with asset management. Thank you.
Director Roback.
So Martin, I do remember when we used the monitoring for our recycled water pipeline years ago at Otay. So right. I think that's where we pioneered it. So I remember you guys used that.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So Martin, I got to say this. So we're in the tap water business.
This water. Yeah. This was actually filled up. This is the honest truth. This was filled up at home. I live in Otay Service District. This is Otay Water District water.
All right. Well, all right. Okay. That's a legitimate answer.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you.
On that note, seeing no further speakers, I'll turn it back to staff for the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to get into the CIP task force, which is our 2-year development process, and then also get into cost estimating as well towards the end. The capital improvement program here at the Water Authority is truly a collaborative effort. It involves multiple departments working together seamlessly. Each of these departments either oversee projects within the CIP based on their area of expertise or contribute to the development and implementation of these projects. These projects are brought before this group during the 2-year budgeting process for evaluation and discussion, ensuring a thorough review and alignment with our goals. Member agency requests are integrated throughout this process as well to address local needs and foster a comprehensive and well-informed decision-making process. When developing CIP projects, we take into account a wide range of considerations to ensure that we are meeting our standards and obligations. Regulatory requirements play a critical role, ensuring compliance with laws which guide our environmental and safety obligations. Additionally, condition assessments provide a detailed evaluation of our infrastructure's health, identifying areas of wear and potential failure across our 308 miles of pipe and 1,600 structures. Together, these considerations help us understand the urgency and scope of each project, determining whether immediate action is needed to prevent disruptions or if strategic planning can address long-term needs. What you can see on the screen here are a couple of photographs from recent condition assessment activities. On the top, you'll see heavily corroded mechanical piping. Just below that is a crack and visual corrosion in one of our first aqueduct bifurcation structures. This upcoming graphic will illustrate our existing CIP development process, which occurs every 2 years, showing at a more granular level how a project is born and what steps are involved to ensure that the proper projects are elevated for execution. So starting on the left, a need for a potential project arises. This could be from a potential. Most commonly, as you've heard, condition assessment data. This need is then communicated to the engineering department. The first question we ask during this intake process is, do we even need a project? Or could this issue be resolved with an operational change or perhaps a member agency agreement? From there, we gather basic information and assign a project manager to further evaluate the need. After this initial review, the project is further defined, establishing its scope along with an estimated execution schedule and cost. Once the basic project parameters have been identified, we coordinate across numerous departments, including O&M for shutdown timing, finance for the 2-year appropriation and 5-year forecast, and water resources for master plan alignment and environmental considerations. This phase analyzes many factors such as financial impacts, scheduled shutdowns, just to name a few. Ultimately, this effort culminates into the budget document you're familiar with, creating transparency and allowing for an informed decision-making process. In managing our capital improvement program, we categorize project portfolios based on risk profiles, which is selected by the board to balance reliability and cost. Over the last couple of budget cycles, there's been much discussion about the desired risk level, and this seemed like a prime opportunity to discuss what low, moderate, and increased risk CIPs actually mean. A low-risk CIP, which is typically recommended by staff, focuses on scheduled replacement, leveraging data to replace assets and minimize life cycle costs, which also minimizes operational impacts to member agencies and stabilizes spending forecasts. A moderate risk CIP reacts to impending failure, addressing assets showing signs of near-term failure with higher probability of service interruptions lasting weeks and impacting member agencies. It requires diligent monitoring and capital to fund short-term repairs, increasing overall life cycle costs. Finally, the increased risk CIP involves running to failure, addressing assets that have failed or are failing to meet a particular service level. With a high probability of emergency shutdowns and the highest operational impact to member agencies, return to service could take months, depending on the failure. Here is a summary of our approved capital improvement program for fiscal years 26 and 27, based on the work of the budget task force, combined with the selection of the moderate risk by the board. The total CIP appropriation is approximately $182 million, broken down into the categories shown on your screen. This suite of projects is focused on maintaining our existing infrastructure, representing our commitment to asset management, which accounts for the lion's share of CIP expenditures. Diving a little deeper into the asset management categories for FY 26-27, with a total of approximately $155 million. The majority of this investment, $115 million, is directed towards our pipeline projects, underscoring their critical role in our infrastructure. The remaining funds are allocated strategically across other core asset types and functions that are shown on the screen. Managing expenditures versus risk is a delicate balancing act in our capital improvement program. On one side, we have financial constraints represented by the dollar sign, and on the other, the level of risk to our infrastructure and service delivery. We strive to find the optimal point where we can invest sufficiently to mitigate risks without overspending, using data-driven decisions to focus on projects that provide the greatest long-term value and reliability to the region. We understand and appreciate the difficult times we are in and want to take a couple of minutes to recognize some of the actions taken to reduce current CIP spending. First, we'll go back a couple of years to the FY 24-25 budget cycle. During that budgeting process, a low-risk CIP was recommended to the board, and included expenditures of $204 million and $264 million forecasted for the FY24-25 and FY26-27 budgets, respectively. This recommended budget balanced investment across various projects and initiatives that are shown here on the screen. These project recommendations were generally based on condition need, or assets that had reached the end of their service life. Before approving the 24-25 budget, the board elected to reduce the CIP appropriation by 10% to approximately $184 million, deferring approximately $20 million in projects. To accommodate the $20 million reduction, staff deferred the projects highlighted in gray on the screen, which included primarily flow control, rehabilitation, and replacement projects. Now we're going to fast forward a bit to the recently approved FY26-27 budget. Going into that budget cycle, the recommended low-risk CIP was, if you recall, $264 million, and included the projects remaining from the FY24-25 deferral that are shown here in white. So these white projects are from the deferral from the previous appropriation. The project portfolio aimed to address the most critical assets and initiatives across the agency with a focus on regional needs, de-emphasizing flow control facilities for individual member agencies. However, in a continued commitment to the moderate risk CIP from the board, staff had to defer an additional $84 million in projects, which is highlighted on the screen here in tan. This 30% reduction removed the remaining flow control facilities planning and design phases, deferred a large weir structure replacement project, and impacted facility roof and equipment replacements. These two examples hopefully illustrate how board risk tolerance decisions have reduced near-term CIP spending. However, it should be noted that these savings aren't free. Increased risk to the system has real consequences and costs, as well as an increased future CIP to address these deferred projects. To sum it up, this graphic illustrates the relationship between capital investment, shown on the far left of the screen, and the key guiding principles that we covered at the beginning. Represents the critical relationship between strategic capital investment and achieving our guiding principles, being safe, reliable, cost-effective, and environmentally sensitive. Ultimately, the closer we align our capital allocations to this recommended level, or the low-risk CIP, the stronger our adherence to the guiding principles, ensuring reliable, cost-effective water delivery to the San Diego region with minimal interruptions. This iteration further exemplifies the relationship between reduced capital investment set by the board and our guiding principles. The visual underscores the effect of lowering the capital investment and the impacts to the various categories under our guiding principles. Since service level reductions will vary depending on the impacted guiding principle, service level reductions will vary depending on the impacted guiding principle, but will likely first be realized with more frequent and urgent pipeline shutdowns. With such complexity and a high consequence of failure, the board can rely on the expertise and professional judgment of its staff. Our expertise, honed through extensive system knowledge, cross-departmental coordination, and data-driven prioritization, will guide us in crafting the most advantageous CIP for the region and for the ratepayers. I think that is going to end this section.
Thank you very much. Director Flessy.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have heard, I think my tally's up to 7, that you guys are a data-driven kind of organization. Martin's leading the charge with 4 times of saying that, so Jason, step it up. So with that data-driven, which I appreciate, I'm a data girl, is there any kind of value engineering that also goes into any of this discussion? And what I mean, more of is we have contractors that specialize, that we use that specialize in certain types of contracts. I will use rehab as an example. Not everybody does rehab. We have certain contractors that do just rehab. So do we ever look at projects that we have to rehab an area that's very difficult to get into, very difficult to mobilize and get in there? And so we really only want to do it once. So we may have a section of pipe that needs rehab now, but another section that's nearby that may need rehab maybe in the 5 to 10 year range. But it may be beneficial to do value engineering and send in a contractor to knock out both of them, because later on down the road, it just may be a better option for us. Does that go into any of your discussions or evaluation when coming up with these projects?
Certainly. Thank you for that question. Yeah, if we could go to slide 36. This value engineering, I think, occurs in various parts throughout a project's life cycle. The first instance that it happens, and it very closely relates to the example that you used, is in that rainbow box there. And this is when we're coordinating across the various departments. So as we are establishing the scope of the project, we understand its location. We then also poke at other things that are in proximity to that asset, right? So if there is a flow control facility that needs a piece of pipe replaced, if the valve right next to it also needs to be replaced, this is the first time that we would catch that. It's not the only time, though. Throughout the design process, which we'll get into in a little bit, through various submittal reviews at design stages, we're constantly asking ourselves that question. And if we can't catch it in planning or design, all of our construction documents feature a value engineering change proposal specification, which encourages contractors to find savings in construction projects and propose them to the Water Authority, where we're able to split the savings with the contractor. So hopefully that answers your question.
Any further discussion? All right. I will turn it back to staff for the remainder of the presentation.
Okay, the one everyone's been waiting for. Cost estimating. Okay, so there has been a lot of discussion around cost estimating, and it seemed like a great opportunity to take to discuss it further. When we talk about an engineer's estimate for a project, it's important to remember what the purpose of that estimate is. And it essentially serves two purposes. The first one is it helps us, the Water Authority, with budgeting, asking ourselves the question, how much capital do we need to build a particular project? The second thing that it does, or its second purpose, is to help a prospective bidder with understanding the size of the project to determine whether or not that project is right for their company. Ideally, an engineer's estimate would fall in the middle of all of the bids received for a particular project. However, there are several factors that can influence where an engineer's estimate ultimately lands relative to those bids, and we're going to use the next few slides to discuss what those factors are. Many factors influence the cost of everyday goods, and construction projects are no different. In the last few years, we've seen dramatic swings in the cost of fuel, lumber, steel, and other commodities essential to construction projects. The drivers impacting costs, I think, can be thought of in two categories: macro impacts and micro impacts. The macro impacts, like tariffs, global material supply and demand, are almost entirely out of our control and affect markets differently. These impacts become exponentially harder to predict with quickly evolving state and federal policies. Micro factors like labor availability, local energy cost, to some extent can be more easily monitored simply due to their proximity. In fact, these impacts can be even influenced by organizations setting local policy. All of these factors influence the costs of projects and our estimates. Contractors generally respond to cost uncertainty and risk with additional dollars in their bid to cover the what-if factor. In essence, the more variables there are in a pricing equation, the harder it is to predict the outcome. To illustrate how these macro and micro impacts show up in our project costs, let's take a look at this graph. This graph represents the percent change in cost for various project types that the Water Authority deals in: pipelines, pump stations, and concrete structures. Also included in this graph is the ENR inflation. You'll notice on this graph, different project types are affected differently when the market fluctuates. For example, in 2004, near the middle of this graph, we see all construction costs tick up, but you'll see pipeline relining, which is heavily influenced by steel prices, exceed that price increase by 3 times. At this time in history, China was preparing to host the Olympics in the middle of their industrial boom and put significant pressure on the global steel market. You'll also notice the dip in pricing in 2009 from the Great Recession and another spike in 2020 from COVID impacts to supply chains. This is to say that fluctuation in market pricing, even large and abrupt ones, is normal and should be met with a measured and tempered response. So in this slide, we're going to walk through the various stages of project development and the associated cost estimates that are developed based on the amount of project detail that's available. The first stage is concept design, where a Class 5 estimate is developed. Class 5 estimates have the widest accuracy range, as noted on the screen, and use broad parametric tools like cost per foot or cost per million gallons to establish budgets. Preliminary design is the next phase in which a Class 4 estimate is created. At this stage, costs for large pieces of work are further defined, and historical costs are applied with inflation factors. As we continue into midpoint design, a Class 3 estimate is developed. At this design stage, enough detail for quantity takeoff is performed for major work and items used. This is the same methodology that contractors use for pricing. Final design stage includes a Class 2 estimate. Here our estimates include detailed unit costs for labor, materials, and equipment. Lastly, at conformed final design, a Class 1 estimate is procured. In addition to detailed unit costs for material and equipment, quotes are obtained from suppliers to produce the most accurate estimate possible. Here we'll see those same design stages and cost estimates as a project evolves over its 2 to 3 year planning and design life. After we complete the Class 1 estimate, we typically get bids 2 to 3 months later before you see it here in the boardroom, and a lot can change in 2 to 3 months, as we've seen, thinking back to those macro and micro impacts that we talked about a little earlier. All of that said, one of the biggest influences in the ultimate bid price is bid competition. Our as-needed cost estimating professional created the table that's shown on the screen, which is derived from thousands of bid results. As you can see, the higher number of bidders, the lower the expected bid cost. The opposite is also true. When you receive less than 4 bids, elevated pricing is expected. For example, in our last few construction advertisements, we've received 2 to 3 bids. According to this chart, it would not be surprising to see the low bid anywhere from 10 to 25% above the engineer's estimate. This is also substantiated by many professional journals and a recent report completed by the City of San Diego's independent budget analysts on their bidding environment. Shown on the screen is an excerpt from that analysis, and it reads, quote, "Data show a decline in bidder participation over time, with the average number of bids per construction contract falling from 4.5 in FY 2017 to 3.1 in FY 25. This reduction in competition is correlated with higher award costs and a growing share of contracts exceeding the engineer's estimate." This chart displays our Water Authority construction projects from the last 5 years. While not a guarantee, generally speaking, when we receive 4 or more bids, the awarded contract falls in or under the engineer's estimate. This is in line with the data and analysis we talked about on the previous slide. For example, the Hawk Mesa Storage Reservoir project, which is the project listed first on this table, had an estimated cost between $13 and $15 million. We received 7 bids, with the low bid coming in at $11.4 million, almost 20% under the engineer's estimate. Here we see our most recent bid advertisements and the low number of bidders alongside with the higher than expected bid amounts. While every project is unique and has a story to tell, as well as the multitude of micro and macro factors that can influence price, one economic truth you can always count on is that more competition equals better pricing. All of that said, there are some things that we can do to try and mitigate the volatility in the bids that we're receiving. Keeping up to date with what commodity prices are doing as the engineer's estimate is being developed, and continuing our dialogue with steel pipe and valve manufacturers on their price factors. Leveraging our cost estimating professionals to prepare the Class 1 and 2 estimates rather than our design consultants is something that we've implemented as well. Lastly, and most importantly, we really need to do everything we can to attract more bidders. It's a very challenging bidding climate right now, and contractors are being selective in what they bid on. The more we can get the word out and make bidding here at the Water Authority more attractive, the more competition and better bid results we expect to create. And that concludes our discussion on cost estimating.
Thank you very much. Director Ray.
Thank you. So the main point of the presentation that I saw or that I heard was that we can't get a significant amount of bidders to bid on the projects. So have you received, or any staff received, any feedback from the bidders that attend pre-bid meetings as to why they choose not to bid on the projects? I mean, you indicated that we need to attract bidders, but we have to know why they're not bidding in order to attract them. So have you received any feedback as to why they're not bidding?
We have, and I'll say that different projects and the timing of projects may change even the same contractor's response to different solicitations. So I'll just comment on some of the last couple of bids that we've received. On our bifurcation structures bid, we do outreach to follow up with folks that have downloaded the plans but chose not to bid, or folks that show up to our pre-bid meeting and don't opt to submit a bid. The general feedback, or some of the feedback that we received there, was related to labor availability, their companies being booked. Board on the San Luis Rey project was some of our administrative requirements, PLA, for example, as discouraging some bidders from bidding on that project. So I'll say it's very time dependent and project specific, but that anecdotally is some of the feedback that we've heard from contractors.
Director Flessy, followed by Director Paul.
Thank you again. On the slides 54 and 55, sorry, I'm new here, so how many of those were PLAs?
The PLA, the first PLA project that was bid, it was the Helix 9 flow control facility. So
and that one was one bidder. Okay. And then what else were PLAs?
Everything since then.
Everything. Okay. So consistently, we've gotten reduced amount of bidders with PLAs. Okay. Thank you.
This was PLA.
Director Paul.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to comment that Escondido just had a bid go out, and we're going to award it tonight, next week. We had 11 bidders. So I think maybe you, in addition to talking to the people who took out the plans but didn't submit anything, is look at people who are not interested at all. None of these had 11 bidders. So thank you.
Director Norman.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I have a question about some of the requirements that we have to put into our projects, as you mentioned earlier, the CEQA and various other kinds of mitigation things. I'm assuming that the marketplace, the labor force companies already know what those are. They, I hope, would be aware that anything they bid on, if they bid on us, it's probably going to be the same bidding that HEC can do for others, right? I mean, they still have to meet CEQA on another project. So those would I be correct in assuming that those would not necessarily be impediments to a project? It is more the labor pool aspects, because costs of supplies are going to be the same for the other guys. So if it's timing on how many bids their company can support, we're pretty well equal, except maybe, and I don't know, PLA. Is that the only factor that's a little bit squishy compared to other bids that a company who wants to be striving in the region would submit?
Yeah, you're right in saying the state requirements related to environmental, stormwater, for example, would be very much the same across the region, regardless of the agency. We do have, again, it would depend on the project, but several other qualifications that we mandate for our projects because of the criticality of them or the specialized nature of them. So that can also reduce the bidding pool. We're not the only agency with a PLA, so we hear that anecdotally on certain jobs. It's not every job, so I can't comment on the percentage of contractors being discouraged by that specifically. We try and make our projects from a requirements perspective to encourage as much competition as we can while protect the project and the water authority to ensure a successful project that gets done on time.
Just a little follow-up. What do you mean by other criteria? I understand the specialty stuff, but what else might we have that you want to ensure we have a higher standard, I'm assuming, of people that are working on this?
Sometimes it's just the size of our projects as well, generally larger. So bonding requirements and things like that could get in the way, which isn't necessarily a function of a water authority requirement, but more the function of the size of the project. Qualifications for welders, for example, is something that I don't think hasn't limited us in the past, but there is a finite number of welders in the area or in the Southwest. And so we're subject to that labor fluctuation.
And how much coordination goes on among the, maybe I'm being really naive here, but the building industry, knowing that, water authority is going to be having this. I'm assuming they watch our wonderful meetings and get the lowdown ahead of time. But, how are they looking at the marketplace of their opportunities, and how do we fit into that? I would be curious. Maybe that's just too anecdotal, but anyhow.
Yeah, we definitely look at the schedule of other agencies bidding work. So we're not bidding the same day. We've actually had to shift some of our bid openings to accommodate, and we get requests from contractors, when they are bidding multiple jobs, so we will look at that. But keep in mind that our schedules are really restrictive to our shutdown periods because we have to do that work during our planned shutdowns. If it's unplanned, it's a different story. But we try to bid those projects in enough time so that the contractors can procure the equipment and be ready for the shutdown period. But we do look at other agencies that are bidding work, so we're not conflicting. But there's only so much we can do in terms of what the amount of work is in the industry. I think, as Jason has mentioned, there's a wide variety of reasons of why contractors will not bid our work. The most recent on the first aqueduct bifurcations, there was a wide range of reasons. It just didn't fit into some businesses' portfolio. They had other ongoing work, and they didn't have the capacity. So I think it just depends on the type of work and the timing of the market. But we do look at what the other agencies are doing, so we're not having the same bid opening date or trying to kind of shift that type of schedule around.
So would that be impacting how you actually schedule some of these things with us as to your, I'm looking back at part of the reason for these workshops is, you had asked for a position that was coordinating all the CIP projects and this and that. Now that you don't have that extra position, you obviously found a way to accommodate the need to look across all the silos. But you have flexibility based on your original criteria of risk, probability versus consequences and everything else to shift things. Do you look at the marketplace before when you're does that go into, we really know there's not going to be anybody or enough competition out there right now. We need to wait another year or two for that project. Does that enter into it at all?
So I'm going to use data-driven, so I get another check mark.
Okay.
Our projects are data-driven, and if you saw there on the one slide, it shows that it takes about 2 to 3 years, right, from design to construction, and we plan those shutdowns about 3 years in advance, where we're working with all of our member agencies to plan out when we're doing our shutdowns. So we have very little flexibility in shifting a year. What we do have flexibility on, though, is looking at, we shift the bid opening date by maybe a week, right? It's not, we can't change when we're bidding the work because it's really planned out 2 to 3 years in advance to accommodate, so we're not doing unplanned. We look to align projects that will share the same shutdown period. So we can do work on the first aqueduct on multiple sections of the aqueduct during the same shutdown. And so we really try to look at those cost-saving measures across all of our projects.
Director Scalzetti. I don't imagine this is a happy birthday.
A couple more months. I understand that we have rising rates, and I really don't want to push off CIP. It's super important, but we have to get more efficient at what we're doing. It concerns me that the staff will take some of the heat on some of their estimatings. I mean, they've been estimating these pipelines for years and years and years. And they know the rate of inflation. It's all data-driven, too. So I don't really buy some of that the engineers estimate is off. I think we need to find where our inefficiency are, and we need to really get on that if we want to save some money and really not have double-digit rates every year. It's plain and simple, but we keep playing this round and round game. Let's get to it. Let's open up the field and get more bidders out there. And that's all I'll get into today.
Director Freehoff, followed by Director Medaffer.
Great, thank you. Along the lines of cost estimating, because now we've shifted, I guess, we utilize a cost estimating consultant versus relying on the designer's estimate. So how is that better and why? And how do you become a cost estimating consultant? And how much is that? Is that costing us more to have a cost estimating consultant come on? I just, again, I'm looking at the ratepayers' monies, and just explain why we're going down that path. Thank you.
So I'll say cost estimating gets done by, depending on the level, staff in-house. In the past, it's been done by our design professionals if they are the ones designing the project. And we've also leveraged as-needed cost estimating professionals for many years to assist us in both doing cost estimating as well as constructability reviews. Again, an outside party. What differentiates a designer from a cost estimating professional is their focus. So our designers are engineers that know everything from hydraulic principles to friction factors and all of that. Cost estimating is not their major, it's their minor. Cost estimating professionals, it's very much the opposite. Many of the folks that work at these organizations are former contractors themselves. They are embedded with contacts in the industry. So they are much more, can much more quickly assess and get up to date with the trends in the marketplace compared to our designers. Now, this wasn't as big of an issue in the past. I would say there was less fluctuation, less things changing, and our designer estimates were good enough. Our estimating history has been, it fluctuates with the market pricing. If we go back to that graph when it's up and down, it comes down to a matter which how fast can we catch up to the real life market pricing, and that's where our cost estimating professionals can help us. So moving forward, we've elected to use them instead of designers. So in terms of the cost to the ratepayer, it's no change. We're just reallocating the funds from the designer to the cost estimator.
Director Medaffer, followed by Director Myers online.
Thank you. I realize the political yin and yang on PLA versus no PLA. It's just part of our partisan politics today, unfortunately. Just remind this board, 21 years ago, this PLA is not a new thing. I'm looking at a document titled San Diego Water Authority Emergency Storage Project Construction Information Sheet, Project Labor Agreement. It's a Q&A. It's dated December 2004. Thank you.
Director Myers.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
That's great. My question is more kind of maybe a bigger question is, whatever the reason is why costs and construction costs seem to be rising, it seems like that's happening. And that what we're getting in terms of bids seem to be much higher or significantly higher than what the estimates have been recently. And we're also seeing that regionally and statewide in some of these very large projects having these very huge increases in costs, Sites Reservoir and other big projects, Pure Water in Los Angeles, for example. So my concern, and I think I expressed this at the last meeting, is how accurate do we feel? How comfortable, how confident are we right now in the numbers that staff has been collecting on what the projected cost is of all of these CIP projects we currently have on the books, let's say for the next 5 years, versus what we've budgeted for it, versus what we are proposing to float in our upcoming bonds. I'm more interested right now in just the reality of what we have, not necessarily why we're there, and trying to figure out whether we really have accurate numbers and whether we are really being fair to ourselves in our budgeting process and our 5-year financial forecast with these numbers. Because if we radically underestimate what the cost of these projects are going to be, we're going to be in big trouble a few years down the road. About that in this presentation today, and I would like to hear much more about that going down the road as we grapple with these issues. Thank you.
So I'll describe maybe the level of accuracy on near-term projects versus longer-term forecasts. They're all included in the CIP, but I think they have a different level of detail associated with them. And so we have different cost factors that will apply. So for the near-term CIP, and we'll do this every 2 years, right? We'll get our next 2 years of projects. We'll look at the 5 years worth of projects. For those projects, we have a defined scope of work, largely. We also have a cost model that we apply to that, and that's taking in data. We get that updated every quarter. So I would say because we have a defined scope of work and we have relatively recent inflation data, we're applying the right inflators to those projects in the near term, say 0 to 5 years. Now that's not going to guarantee that we fall in there. But I think it's a pretty good estimate based on everything that we know today. Outside of that 5-year, we apply an inflationary factor. I think the last one was 3%, which is based on the last 50 years average inflation in the U.S. So I think that falls in line with best practice in the industry in terms of CIP planning. It's difficult to say what will happen in the future. but I think we have a reasonable and responsible level of funding projected in the CIP right now.
If I can follow up, I guess, thank you. I hear your answer, but I don't know, to me, there's at least I'm feeling a disconnect because we were so way off on the last one. And, you know, I'm sure you using those same inflation factors. The staff is still confident that overall that, I mean, I think there was that the estimate that we originally were relying upon, originally was like 5 to 7, and then the estimate jumped up to, 10 to 12. You're confident we're not going to have jumps like that? You really think that we're okay in that 3% a year realm? I mean, I know I'm not trying to, you know, get any promises. I understand it's more art than it is science sometimes, but you feel like we're pretty good with these numbers right now?
I'm happy to answer that. This is Tish Berg, Deputy General Manager. The project that we most recently had was a unique project, and I think everyone on the board would agree with that statement. As such, we saw the estimate bounce around as we refined the project and went out to bid. With the projects that we have going forward with regard to a focus on pipeline replacement and pipeline rehabilitation, while we put our flow control facilities on hold, as staff mentioned, for approximately 5 years or more potentially, we feel very comfortable that that is in the center of our wheelhouse. Now, with that said, we reevaluate these numbers annually. And so I hear your concerns, and staff has heard your concerns. And when we go through our mid-year budget process, we will make sure that we scrub our CIP and that the numbers that we bring forward to the board are ones that staff feels confident recommending. Thank you for the pointing out the concerns, and I agree and understand them.
Okay, well, I really appreciate that answer, and I appreciate you staying on top of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Rivera, followed by Director Miller.
There are many factors that affect why we get that discrepancy. My experience has been that, you know, time is money, especially in the construction industry, and we have large-scale projects. And my experience with the local agency was try to handle the fatal flaws as early as possible and get the project to stay on schedule. And whatever it took to get the construction permit issued, that's what we focused on. And I think the other things that we look at is we're all competing with each other for the same amount of contractors are able to do the work. And so I do agree with some of the statements that are said that we try to schedule putting different projects out to bid at different times, giving the contractor more time to look over the plan so that they're not rushing and covering their bids with extra money just because they want to reduce the risk on a project. But sometimes we have projects that are limited to the season that the work can be done, or as the planned shutdowns need to occur and they're scheduled way in advance. So there's a lot of things that we need to look at, but I do think that, you know, we have to look at everything, starting with the local agencies and what holds up our projects. Have maybe some of these cost overruns been because we should have had a project out to bid 6 months earlier or a year earlier, and we just had a lot of difficulty getting that permission from the local agency? Thank you.
Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Serrano. You know, I listened to the discussion and I think about this, what's brought this all about is this last project we've got. And the last project that was bid, obviously the budget was way low and the prices were way high. This project that we're gnashing our teeth over is not in our wheelhouse. It's a completely oddity for us to be doing grading and landscape project only. And so I want to defend our staff a little bit. This is not in our wheelhouse. If this was a pipeline, 2 miles of pipeline relining, I'm sure our staff would have a very good grasp at what that should cost, even with inflationary pressures. But these one-offs like this distort the whole scenario. These one-offs should not be in a PLA. They should be put out to the market. If we were going to build a fence We don't need a PLA and the union to build us a fence when we've got 1,000 fencing contractors out there. We could get some pretty competitive pricing, and they could still pay prevailing wage and all that on it. So there are contractors out there to do these one-offs. There's not a lot of contractors out there that could put an 8-foot pipeline in the ground at $55 to $100 million. So the availability of enough contractors to do this type of work is small in its own right. And coming out of COVID, there was a pent-up demand, and so what we have is an abundance of work and a shortage of contractors. I go back to when 2008 we had the decline in the market. The blue book for San Diego was about 2.5 inches thick, and in 2 years it went down to 1 inch thick. That's how many contractors we lost in the industry. And so you end up with pent-up demand and a low amount of contractors. So there's a lot of dynamics on what happens with the bids out there, and I could talk for hours on various factors that hit it, but I think it's kind of unfair for us to throw our staff under the bus on this one project that is a one-off, and if any contract we had deserved to be taken out of PLA and put out to the open market, this was the project we should have tipped our toe in the water and seen what happens. So I don't fault Jason and his staff or Nina and her staff for being off on this one, because this is not something we do every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Miller. Director Leahy.
Thank you. I wanted to say something similar to Director Miller. Estimating, for those that are not aware, estimating is an art. You can do it for decades. You could do it for a career, and you can still miss things. But it is an art, and not everyone can do it, and not everyone can do it well. I know many estimators that have been doing it for 20, 30 years, and they still are horrible at it. And then I know others that have just jumped into it, and they are fantastic because they understand how work gets built. And that is a concept in itself. One of the first jobs I ever worked on in construction for a wastewater plant, actually, no, it was a water plant for a Metropolitan. We walked onto the job negative $7 million because our estimator missed something in our bid. And that's not a fun way to start a project as a contractor, walking on negative $7 million and having to make that up. So these are things that's coming from the contractor's end. That's not even coming from the designer's end. So hanging our hat on the estimate it's what it is. It's an estimate. So it's supposed to be a ballpark. Where we're not supposed to be is two times over the estimate, and that's where I think we get into market factors and other things. So I think I just want to say that you know we're expecting a lot and putting a lot of expectations on our staff to get this, you know, dead ass right, and it's not going to happen. So we just need to keep that in mind, that this is an art, it is a talent, and not everyone has it, and we can't expect that from staff. And honestly, even our expert full-time estimators are going to miss things at times. So just keep that in mind when we see the engineer's estimate. There's a lot that goes into it: production rates, how fast you can lay a piece of pipe. Like, are you putting 1 stick in the ground a day, or are you putting 5 sticks in the ground a day? That's all different depending on the type of project, the soil, the depth, tons of different conditions. So I don't want us to hang our hat on that when it comes to these projects, and I think there's other factors within our control as far as a policy level that we can discuss that help us make decisions when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to our costs, and comes into the decisions that we as a board are making. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, I'll turn it back to staff for the conclusion of the presentation.
All right, so you're seeing me again. That means we're almost there. So thank you for all the comments and the dialogue. It's been great. So just have a couple more slides to wrap up. So just a repeat of what we're looking forward to in this current 2-year and the next 5-year. And Director Myers, I was going to address your concerns. I've heard them. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that every 2 years we have a bite at the apple with the budget, and that's where we really look at where the projects are in the design, going out to construction, and we're really honing in on those costs every 2 years. The 5 year is a good outlook, but as you heard from Jason, a lot of things can be factored into changes to the cost estimating world. And so we're really paying attention, particularly as we're going forward with bidding a reline project in the spring. There is that 2 to 3 month gap between the final cost estimate and when we go out to bid. And that's just the nature of finishing the design, going out to bid, not bidding too early for additional costs ahead of going into construction. One of the things we heard from the contractors was like, give us more time for the procurement, for the steel. And so we're adjusting that, but we're going to pay attention to the steel market because that is really in flux based on potential tariffs. And we have good connections to our steel supplier. And so we'll be touching base with them just to make sure, are we still in line with our estimate? And if we're not, we'll adjust that estimate prior to going out to bid. So we are keeping a pulse on things. I want you to rest assured that we are doing that. In addition, we've had other agencies reach out to us on what their bidding climate is and what they're seeing. And we're part of this group called Clean 17. It's a lot of Southern California as well as Northern California agencies stretching out all the way to Texas, where we get together once a year, I believe, and we talk about things. But we're putting together a call to talk about cost estimates. MWD is spearheading that. So they're seeing increases in their bids that come in. So we do work collectively with other agencies to get a pulse on what they're doing and how we can increase competition, how we can look at what other factors are influencing our estimates. So we are out there. One thing that we are working on with finance is on the long-range financing plan, which is a 10-year forecast. And so that, I want to give you a little preview on the relining. This speaks to Director Freehoff. You were asking about what our outlook is on relining. And so this is what our 10-year forecast looks like for our relining project. Keep in mind, this is just for pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe. That's what we reline. So over the next 10 years, we are planning to complete all of Pipeline 5 relining as well as the crossover pipeline. Pipeline 4 will bleed into beyond our 10-year plan. And so one of the things that we will look at during the next 10 years is looking at ways to our shutdown costs, as well as just looking at other ways to reduce our costs, potentially combining our relining, particularly in Pipeline 4, in a shorter duration versus longer duration. Right now, we're looking at a much longer duration for Pipeline 4, and it comes down to cost. And that's something that you will see reflected in the 10-year financing plan later on this month. Currently, our CIP projects have sufficient funding through 2030, so that's for the next 5 years. Beyond 2030, we will be looking for additional budget that, again, that's part of the long-range financing plan. So additional budget is going to be needed to reline the crossover, Pipeline 4, and the remaining section of Pipeline 5, which are scheduled beyond 2030. Additionally, we'll be looking for additional funding to rehabilitate structures such as on Pipeline 3 and the La Mesa Sweetwater extension. Again, the funding for these projects is beyond 2030, so in the next couple of years, we'll be coming to the board for additional funding for the board's consideration. Keep in mind that this is still maintaining it's still within asset management. You will have to continually fund an asset management program. It just doesn't end because a facility that you built 25, 30 years ago is going to have to be potentially rehabilitated. Fortunately, on our pipelines, we're doing a really good job of relining that at 75 to 100 years to the life of that pipeline. So theoretically, in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to complete all of our relining projects. And so that is the bulk of what we're spending our CIP on. So with that, we are going to continue our approach of maintaining an adaptive approach, adjusting based on risk. That data-driven approach is really important, and we're relying heavily on Martin's group to provide that data. So we're addressing the facilities and assets that we need to address in a just-in-time manner. Our 2-year CIP has clearly defined projects. We were able to provide that project list to you back in April for this current 2-year CIP that we're working on. However, just keep in mind that beyond that 2-year outlook, and especially beyond that 5-year outlook, those projects may change. They're really subject to the changes based on risk. And so that's the benefit of doing our budget every 2 years. That really wraps up our workshop. I just really want to take a moment just before we go to final questions and comments. I really want to acknowledge the entire team that was behind preparing this workshop, not only just the presenters today, but we had a whole team behind us. They did a tremendous job in not only preparing this workshop, also pivoting based on the comments that we heard from all of you over the last 2 board meetings. It took really a lot of effort by the staff, and yet they still maintained their daily work activities. We're still maintaining the schedules on our projects. So I just want to acknowledge and thank all the staff that was involved in putting this together. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Serrano, for any closing remarks or discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Nina, to you and your team and everybody who's been part of this, I want to express our thanks and appreciation on behalf of the board. We know that getting all this stuff together and presented to us is often a heavy lift, and I hope you all know that it does not go unnoticed, and we're tremendously grateful for the time that you put into this. So thank you. I have a few other speakers. Director Ray.
Thank you, Chair. First, thank you to the staff. I know that this was a heavy lift on top of their everyday duties that they have. If memory serves me correctly, the purpose of this CIP or the request of this meeting to go over CIP was by Director Acosta, who is suspiciously absent. But it was because there was a request to have a new position to prioritize CIP projects. So, and I'm not sure if this is a question you can answer now, but I'm just wondering if in going through this process and having this special meeting, do you feel like it helped you prioritize those projects? And does staff still feel that there's a necessity for an additional member to do CIP prioritization? And it's okay if you can't answer. You can say, I don't know, I can't answer.
So I think something that's important is we're just maintaining our current process. We were going to enhance our process with that additional staff member, but currently we're just going to maintain our current process, really looking at the 2-year window. We're not really looking, we look at a 5-year window, but those projects can shift. We don't have a long-term planning. We've been asked about, there were some comments during some of our previous reporting for a long-term plan. The only long-term plan we really have is for our relanding program. All the other assets that we have, we're fitting them in. We have a good idea of where they're going to come, but we also don't know. There's also additional projects that are going to come up. Where do we fit those in? That's something that we just really look on a 2 to 5 year plan. We don't have that longer range plan.
And I think if you look at most of the other, the member agencies, they don't go beyond a 5-year plan. I don't know. Sometimes maybe they have a 10-year plan, but I think I've only really seen most of us have a 5-year plan. But again, you guys are doing a great job, so thank you. I just wondered if you had a feel for what you thought about the necessity of that position still. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Director Leahy, followed by Director Roback.
Thanks. And I think I was probably one of the people commenting about the longer plan. And I think just to add context to that, my comments were more geared towards frustration over the limited scope of the master plan. So typically, an agency will do a longer-term master plan looking at all of our assets and planning out the 20, 30-year projected projects and schedules and give that roadmap to avoid having to add staff. So that's where that came from, was my 2 years ago frustration that we were doing such a limited scope on our existing facility master plan. So just to qualify that, I think that is something that can be done and should be done if we don't have it, so that you have that going forward. And again, my comment was so that we're not having to do things multiple times and trying to be as efficient as possible. I do have a question on the relationship between the CIP budget and rates and what comes first. It seems like, and I might be wrong, but it seems like staff develops the CIP budget, maybe hands it over to finance, and then finance projects what that rate is going to be. I know finance isn't here, but projects what the rate is going to be based on that? Or is it the opposite, where I know we do a projection of for instance, next year's rate might be 8%, right? We've projected that if we adopt this rate this year, next year is going to be 8%. I'm using a for instance. Does then finance say, okay, well, we said it was going to be 8%, so then CIP, now you have this bucket of money to work within. How does it?
So they do use our 5-year forecast.
Okay.
In looking ahead, and I guess I'll look to Dan or Tish.
Yeah, representing the finance department.
Thank you.
I think you have it right generally. I mean, the CIP is developed, and I think that in terms of the forecast that comes out of our rate folks, if they're off by some amount, we do have some flexibility within the lifetime CIP, and so you've seen that a few times where we're able to adjust the lifetime, push projects out. And then, it really, some of this depends on the execution rate in any given year. This year, we're under executing, which has allowed us to free up money for emergency projects, for instance. So I think the two groups are working together consistently.
Okay. And I ask because it's, I think, fundamentally different than how agencies and cities do that, where, and sorry, you're right in my eye line, so I'm going to use you as an example, and it's coming up. So, like, for instance, the city of San Diego is doing their rate increase. It's a 4-year, 5-year rate increase, 4-year rate increase. So they're setting what that's going to be for the next 4 years. And so what's going to happen year over year, and we did this at Oceanside, is we then say, okay, well, this is what our revenue's projected to be, and then we would go to our capital group and say, this is how much you have to spend. Figure it out, like prioritize and make the changes you need to fit within that, because we're not going back for a rate increase. And I think that's where that's fundamentally different here at this organization, where we do this on an annual basis as opposed to even trying a 2-year basis of, all right, this is the guardrails we're living within for at least 2 years, and we need to make adjustments and figure it out. But it could perhaps balloon some of those budgets if increases continue to happen and inflation and things like that, where we're continuing to try to do the 100% reliability plus get everything done at the same time, and we're not bound by a set rate that's already been determined by the board. So just a thought for, well, at least everyone in here on the process, but then considerations that if you don't like it, that process can change.
So one thing just to comment to that, so that is where the budget task force is really important. So finance is involved in our meetings. I mean, we start the 2-year budget like in August. So next August, we're going to start those budget task force meetings, and we literally meet like once a week, where we're talking. And so finance really knows kind of what we're estimating, and hence why we're down at that 180 to kind of keep the rates minimal. So they are in tune. They know what we're planning. We will talk with them if we have a big ask and what we need to do. And so then we work with them for about 6 months before the draft documents even propose to internally to the general manager's office.
Thank you. I understand that. I guess where I was saying is, instead of starting at what was projected to the board the previous year for the rate, not necessarily the budget, but we projected that the next year's rate would be 8% in this example, that's not the starting point. Then we come back the next year and it's 22%, and then we're chipping away to get down to 8. So that's just my example on the different process.
Director Roback, followed by Director Flessy.
So, in terms of trying to come up with the best way to do something, I'm not an engineer. A lot of us out here aren't engineers. We're around that. My world is business, and so I weigh in the best I can, utilizing my perspective and my paradigm, if you will. I know the general managers of the different retail agencies meet with Dan and come up with collectively, maybe the best way to approach something. Our CFO, our public relations staff meets together with the water authority staff. I'm wondering, does the engineering staffs of the respective agencies meet where you guys collaborate and kind of brainstorm on, methodologies? Does that occur as well?
With the other member agencies, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
How frequently do we meet? Quarterly? With the member agency managers? Or we meet annually. We used to meet more frequently, but we do collaborate, and we're constantly communicating with our member agencies. Especially, we're working a lot with Met, kind of since they're on the same scale as we are in terms of the large diameter type things. And so we're working with them to just identify what efficiencies they're having and things like that.
Yeah, because I had some discussions with some of our staff about kind of the perspective they've had on water authority projects, and it was interesting the way they termed it was the water. You know, in terms of the quality of the pumps, you know, the way you look at things, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but it's not necessarily the most efficient way of doing things either. So,
yeah.
But again, I'm not an engineer,
yeah,
so
right.
who am I to say what the best way of doing this would be?
Right, and
I'm happy to address that, Nina. As an engineer and a former general manager of a retail water agency, I do appreciate, and I've heard that perspective as well. And there is a difference in the engineering standards because of the risk. So we talked about pounds per square inch, PSI, the impact of a break in a retail water system, a knocked off fire hydrant, et cetera, taking out maybe homes, flooding, so forth. Ours could potentially be catastrophic. And so there are the tolerance is much tighter as a result of that. With that said, we have been talking with your engineers and your general manager, and we do understand that there are opportunities for value engineering that we have been doing in-house and have not been necessarily communicating clearly with the board that we are looking at in the future, making sure that you understand and we're sharing with you where we do find ways to make sure that the parts that don't need to be platinum aren't platinum, if I may use that analogy.
Right. And before we go any further with the discussion, we've lost a quorum. So I don't know. We've lost our quorum.
All right, so therefore, we will be adjourned due to a loss of quorum. Thank you all very much.